A man was sitting in the middle of the room, playing a grand black piano with his back to Jasmine. As if the man sensed Jasmine's arrival, his hands stopped moving on the piano keys, and a mysterious smile appeared on his lips. "Welcome to my kingdom, darling." His rich, heavy voice went right through Jasmine's ears and touched her soul. As he stood up and turned around, Jasmine felt her heart stop beating. She had never imagined such a handsome man, who was actually in front of her. Dressed in a huge black coat and black jeans, his 6-foot-tall figure and strong, broad body were more prominent. His milk-white complexion enhanced his sculptor face, which was carved perfectly, and that blue eyes could plunge anyone's heart into the depths of the ocean. He slowly took a step and stood right in front of her, who was looking at this beautiful person. His deep blue eyes also wandered over Jasmine's attractive face with interest. Beautiful. Only one word came out of his lips for Jasmine. This word was self-evident that indeed she was beautiful. The booming voice from this man jerked Jasmine slightly, who was gravely lost in his spell. I'm Lisa," she stammered while introducing herself. The drop of her eyelids ashamedly was enough to tell that it was a false introduction. "I couldn't help myself, and I just had to come," she added, taking out the same letter from her coat's pocket. It was Lisa who asked to take it with her as evidence. Instead of saying anything, Edward took the envelope and looked at it quickly. "How long have I been waiting for you?" He observed her brown eyes with his blue eyes. "I know, but you also know everything about me, don't you?" she said slowly and pointed to her married life. She braced herself and got into the role of Lisa, which she had to play for the next 7 days. And for Lisa, because Edward wasn't a stranger, she was normalized by coming out of the realm of hesitation. Otherwise, a nervous or fascinated look might have made her suspicious. "Go get some rest. Your room is ready. See you at dinner." Edward finished the conversation himself. She shook her head and turned to leave. "Listen." At the call, she stopped and turned around. "What are my 2 conditions?" Edward wanted to know. "First, no question. Second, compliance with the first condition," she replied with gratification. It was a code word that Lisa had taught her. "Go and relax." When the answer was accurate, he gave a nod, indicating a serious green signal, and then left. In the letter, Edward had mentioned that he was preparing the last room of the first corridor for her, so she headed in that direction. Lisa had told her every little detail about Edward, and Lisa's voice once again came to her mind. Edward's parents passed away many years ago. He lives alone. He doesn't like to meet anyone, and he especially hates questions. She began to walk through the long corridor. On the wall to the left were beautiful and valuable paintings, while on the right there were tall windows. Reaching the last room, she pushed the door and entered. As expected, the room and every single thing in it was stunning, just like a castle. Due to the weariness of the long journey, she desperately wanted to get into a soft, warm bed and sleep deeply for a long time. But she was a little surprised when she came near the bed. A white silk gown was placed on the bed along with a note. Jasmine took the note in her hands and read quietly. Dinner at 9 p.m. means Edward was indirectly giving the message that she has to dress up for the dinner. Interesting, she smiled self-deprecatingly. At the appointed time, Jasmine came out of the room. She wore the same white silk gown that had been given to her. Now it was even more captivating while there was deep silence everywhere, and only the ticking of Jasmine's sandal could be overheard. When she reached the dining room, she saw a long table in the middle and several chairs around it. Various types of dishes were decorated on the table, and burning candles on the candle stand placed at a little distance were adding to the beauty of the table. In the single chair was Edward in all his momentousness. Edward pointed to the single chair in the other corner as he met Jasmine's eyes. He was requesting her to sit there. Obliging his command, she came and sat there. There was Edward on one side of the long table and Jasmine on the other. Between the two of them was this big table on which she was quite surprised to see the food adorned. "You have made all of this?" She could not help but ask, as she didn't see any staff like every lord and lady has. "Yes," was the one-word answer that only amplified her awe. He started eating the food on his plate with the help of a knife and fork. This was probably an indication to Jasmine that now you should also eat silently. Instead of saying anything more, she removed the large round lid from the plate in front of her and yelped. On the plate were the severed fingers of a girl with blood on them. "They're sugar sticks with jam and almonds." At Edward's spotting voice, Jasmine looked at him with surprised eyes, who was still eating contentedly. Then she looked carefully at the item on the plate again. A batter made of flour, sugar, and butter was baked in the oven in the shape of a long finger with almonds nailed to the side, while red strawberry jam gave the impression of blood. Jasmine's halting breathing recovered, and the pulse returned to moderate. She covered the plate back with the lid and picked up another plate that had beef. With the help of a knife and a fork, she cut a little bit, took it out on her plate, and started eating. Both of them did not talk during the meal. There was silence in the room, and only the sound of spoons hitting the plate could be heard. Jasmine felt that as much as Edward was eager to meet Lisa, he would have eventually talked to her a lot, told her about his agitated feelings, and maybe could have asked her a lot of questions that she as Lisa had been preparing to answer. But here everything turned out to be contrary to the thought. Edward's manner was cold rather than warm, and instead, there were only silences that spoke. Jasmine had finished eating in a while. Looking over at Edward, he still seemed to be eating casually. Jasmine was about to place the fork on the plate when it fell. Bending down to pick up the fork, Edward's feet were not visible on the other side of the table. She straightened up in surprise to find Edward standing next to her, completely astounded. How did he get from one end of the 10 to 12 feet long table to the other in the blink of an eye? He didn't even make the sound of footsteps. "Come with me." His tone was grim, and then he left the place like a ghost. Jasmine sat there for a few moments and tried in vain to understand this incomprehensible person. Then she got up and went towards the left. He was walking with both his hands in the pockets of his black long coat, and Jasmine was following him with many questions in her mind. He climbed the wide marble staircase to the top floor and entered a room. Jasmine also came in through the open door and was stunned to see the splendor of this beautiful bedroom, while Edward was nowhere to be seen, having entered here only a moment ago. The most beautiful thing in this room was the king-size bed. On all four sides of it were raised timbers with white curtains tied to them. The burning fireplace in the room kept the temperature moderate. Otherwise, it was quite chilly in the whole castle due to the month of October. And now Edward was nowhere to be seen. A startled Jasmine was just about to call out to him when Edward blindfolded her from behind. "Edward, what are you doing?" She was a little nervous. "Hush, no question," he whispered close to her dainty ear. She fell still. Edward caressed her exposed shoulder with his lips while pulling all the hair from behind. A shiver ran through Jasmine's body. His lips were cold like ice, and his breath was hot like fire. From the shoulder, his lips traveled seductively to her neck, kissing the lobe of her ear along with her rosy cheek. He repeated the same process of kissing over face to neck, making Jasmine aroused. She rested her head on Edward's shoulder, surrendering herself completely to him. Edward turned her around with a jerk and wrapped his arms around her waist. Gently holding the hair in his fist, he raised her head and began to run his lips over her delicate lips. She felt the touch on her soft lips, but it was too short. Edward quickly removed his lips from her, as if he was teasing her. She wanted to have that touch again, but before she could protest to him, Edward introduced her to a new feeling, one that was even more beautiful. That was the feeling of his tongue teasing her lips and entering her mouth. The feeling of exchanging breaths. Jasmine vulnerably wrapped both arms around him. After a while, Edward let out a shaky breath. Kissing her chin and nipping her neck, his thumb started to trace her shoulder. The fine straps of the dress on the shoulder dropped with the finger that held the dress. The white silk gown fell off as the straps came off. Laying naked Jasmine down on the bed, he leaned over her as well, reaching out and pulling the strings of the white curtains on the sides of the bed. The curtains fell around the bed, covering them both from the unwanted sights. Jasmine couldn't see him because of the red blindfold, and there was no sense of seeing. Edward's closeness and touch had brought her to the highest point of intoxication. Edward's obsessive kissing and love-making process was giving her a strange pleasure. In the light of the fireplace, two shadows were visible on the gray curtains on the bed, lost in each other, leaving for a beautiful, heightened, passionate pleasure until dawn. 25th of October, 1930. Sunrays streaming in through the large windows announced that it was morning. The curtains of the four-post bed were drawn back. Jasmine, who was alone in the middle of the bed, had not yet woken up with a white sheet covering her bare body. The feeling of sunlight spreading in the room slowly started to break her sleep. She mumbled and opened her eyes. For a moment, she could not understand where she was. When her mind also awakened, she realized that she slept with a stranger. She stood up and felt the pain in every part of her body. As if the whole night she did not know how much injustice was done to her, and she didn't remember anything about last night, except that she had fainted in Edward's presence, and he was still abusing her lips with his. She looked here and there for her dress, but she couldn't find it anywhere, which made her worried. Only then did her eyes fall on the nearby couch. It was a light blue cotton gown with a chit over it. She came down from the bed with a white sheet wrapped loosely around her body and read it. Breakfast at 9 a.m. She quietly picked up the gown and headed towards the bathroom. The lukewarm water was already prepared in the bathtub, in which every part of the body felt extremely relaxed, and the feeling of pain went away. Under the influence of this, she calmed down and closed her eyes. Just then, an ugly hand came out of the foamy water and slowly started caressing her leg. Jasmine immediately opened her eyes and straightened her head. The weird sensation, along with her hands, was gone. She began to wonder what she had just felt. Or was she just delusional? After freshening up in a light blue cotton gown, she walked straight into the living room, where sunlight streamed in through the tall windows. This was probably where Edward was waiting for her while sitting in his reserved single chair. "Good morning," Jasmine chirped shyly. Edward looked at her and, instead of answering, pointed to the chair on the other side. "I have to sit with you." Ignoring the order, she pulled the chair next to him and sat down. Edward stared at her with his deep blue eyes for a few moments, then turned to his breakfast. As usual, breakfast was also well arranged. "Are you angry with me, Edward?" Jasmine whispered while sensing his gloomy mode. "No," was the one-word reply in a grim tone. "Then why are you not talking to me properly?" she asked. He then looked at her. "You've been so strained with me since I came here, even though I thought we'd talk a lot. Is there any problem?" she said gently, placing her delicate hand on Edward's strong hand. He looked at her as if he had not expected this action at all. Ever since Jasmine found out about Edward's illness through Lisa, she thought that now that she was coming to him as Lisa, she would do her best to remove the sadness and despair from his life. It will make the last days of his life so beautiful that he leaves the world happily. But he wasn't even talking to her, which made Jasmine realize that she might have to work hard to break his emotions. Edward removed her hand from under his and walked away, leaving the breakfast as it was.